Mario. Hello.
I didn't always love Super Mario 64. For a long time, 64 was that one 3D Mario that I respected for laying the groundwork for games like Sunshine and Galaxy and Odyssey, but it was also the worst 3D Mario to me. The 3D Mario with the bad camera, the outdated controls, the endgame platforming challenges that would always make me clench my ass cheeks. And yet, for as much as I preferred the other 3D Marios over it, 64 was always the one I gravitated towards whenever I wanted to replay a 3D Mario game. Despite owning Sunshine and the Galaxy games first, Super Mario 64 was the one I had the most nostalgic memories of. I didn't even play it much as a kid. Like I said, I didn't even own it for a good while there. But looking back, it was always a constant, ever-present part of my life. It was always that one game that was nestled in my cousin's N64, that one game I saw being played on an arcade cabinet loaded with a bunch of emulators and ROMs in a convenience store while on a family trip to Mexico one year, that one game that these unofficial web browser Mario games I would play in the computer lab at school always took inspiration from. Mario 64, for as long as I've been aware of it, always fascinated me, because it was always there, wherever I looked. Why though? Why was this game, its music, its influence, its levels, everywhere? Not even the first Super Mario Bros. Game seemed to have left quite the same impact or garnered as legendary a legacy as 64. It was only a couple of years ago that I found my answer, and when I did, I came to an epiphany. Mario 64 is actually my favorite 3D Mario game because it is a game that is greater than the sum of its parts. I didn't just love Mario 64, I loved everything surrounding it. And today, I'm going to share my own personalized story of how I learned to adore Super Mario 64 and everything that it encompasses.
Here we go.
I briefly touched on my belief that Super Mario 64 made a larger splash in the gaming industry than the original Super Mario Bros. Did. To some, this may seem like a blasphemous, downright audacious claim to make, but it is one that I firmly stand by. Mario 64 was not the first 3D game ever made, not even the first 3D platformer. But when you consider all of the little nuances that need to be taken into account when developing a successful 3D game that we as players tend not to think about much, and how the Mario 64 team keenly understood how pivotal they were for making their 3D platformer intuitive and mechanically rich and fun to play, something as new and unproven as Super Mario 64 was in 1996, frankly, shouldn't have worked as well as it did. And not only did it work, but many facets of its design went on to become foundational for nearly every 3D game that succeeded it. Intentionally or not, it wrote a whole rulebook for an entirely new evolution of interactive entertainment. This wasn't accomplished though without many years of brainstorming how a game like this would even function. Shigeru Miyamoto began conceptualizing a 3D Mario game as far back as the early 90s, when the Super Nintendo had only been out for a couple of years. The power of that console though, even with something like the Super FX chip used for Star Fox, was not at the level required for Miyamoto to realize his vision, and the digital input of the SNES's D-pad wasn't ideal for the 3D free-roaming platformer that the project would end up morphing into. If this project was going to happen, it needed to be as uncompromised of an experience as possible. 3D had been done quite a few times by this point, but it always came with an asterisk. The first 3D Mario couldn't just be 3D by technicality and call it a day. It needed to showcase how being in 3D could fundamentally change the way that players interacted with video games forever. Audiences needed to be able to look at this and say to themselves, this is the future. And with Nintendo in the middle of architecting their first console fully capable of rendering and displaying 3D graphics without any caveats, the Nintendo 64 was the perfect home for Mario's most ambitious adventure yet. Arguably more important than the bump and raw specs was the controller engineered for the system, one with an analog stick that was capable of moving Mario omnidirectionally with precise, true-to-life weight and acceleration. The controls were Miyamoto's top priority, and Mario's core movement was worked on for many months before any other substantial work on the game was done. Miyamoto is one of the biggest advocates for player expression in the industry, believing that audiences should be allowed to creatively and freely express themselves through game mechanics, figuring out their own ways to pass through obstacles and tackle the game's many challenges. This same mentality was part of the inspiration for the game's mission and level structures. With few exceptions in the final game, objectives could be cleared in any order, players could switch between levels on a whim, and the process of completing the objectives could be tackled in multiple different ways. At one point during development, 64 was going to have a traditional flagpole serve as the goal at the end of linear obstacle course-like levels, but by making the levels more open and filling them with more than one objective, this would not only encourage replayability, since the objectives could be cleared in any order, this would also incentivize players to experiment with the game's movement system more. The free roam open nature of the game also meant that the team had to spend a bunch of time testing out dozens upon dozens of camera systems to find which one would work best. Super Mario 64 was first shown to the public at Space World 1995. Apparently, this build of the game contained over 30 levels, but this number was effectively halved in the final release due to the deadline the team was working under. That deadline resulted in some of the game's final levels being haphazardly thrown together, and looking at the final game, yeah, no shit. But after a simultaneous delay for the game and the console, the Nintendo 64 finally launched in Japan on June 23, 1996, and in North America 3 months later, with Super Mario 64 being a launch title. It was one of only 2 launch titles for the system, the other being Pilot Wing 64, but much like the Game Boy launching with Tetris or the Switch launching with Breath of the Wild, Mario 64 was all that the N64 really needed. Whereas Ocarina of Time paved the way for the 3D action-adventure genre with its state-of-the-art Z targeting system, Super Mario 64 paved the way for every 3D game. If a game has a controllable camera and a Z-axis, it likely owes a lot to Mario 64. Any 3D game that's worth a damn owes something to Mario's first 3D adventure. Not gonna lie, I was too young to remember exactly when I first laid eyes on the game, but I do remember it being one of the first 3D games I saw in action, if not the first one. I want to say that for the first year and a half or so of my indoctrination as a gamer, all I knew were 2D platformers on the Game Boy Advance and Super Nintendo, gameplay loops that were simple to comprehend, and controller layouts that were even easier to get a handle of. This is what video games were to me. What the f*** is that? One of my cousins had a Nintendo 64. The console's design was striking and the controller had a joystick-looking thing that I had only ever seen on arcade machines at the mall, and my cousin was using it not to play Pac-Man. It was a Mario game, but not the type that I was familiar with. It was a Mario game that looked like this. Whoa. It's like he's a real person now. I saw my cousin control Mario in ways that were previously unfathomable to me. She was making him run in circles, climb trees, punch Goombas, do backflips and long jumps, and fall asleep when she got up to use the restroom and left the controller idle. It was fucking magical, okay? That was the full extent of my experience with Mario 64 at the time though. I was more of an onlooker and didn't really get much hands-on time with the game. I'm sure my cousin did let me try it out, but it was probably just for a couple of minutes at most whenever I visited. I just didn't get this yet, you know? I was too young. I was still stuck on the minecart level in Donkey Kong Country. You think I was going to be able to beat King Babam? As I got older, I noticed that 3D was pretty much the norm for video games now, especially after I got my GameCube. I became much more acclimated to how 3D video games function and how to be somewhat decent at them. I still sucked ass though, not gonna lie. I didn't get good at video games until I was 10 or so years old, I want to say. But my lack of expertise didn't stop me from having fun, and one of the games I had the most fun with as a kid was Super Mario Sunshine, the first 3D Mario I owned and played when I actually had some semblance of an idea of what I was supposed to do. Another one of my cousins eventually got a Wii with Super Mario Galaxy, and I played the hell out of that whenever I got the chance during sleepovers and such. And I eventually got both it and Galaxy 2 for myself when my family got me a Wii. And everywhere I turned, everybody I knew with a Nintendo DS had Super Mario 64 DS, the 2004 remake of the original 1996 classic, which I also eventually owned. However, the N64 one still had this hold over me. Even though I eventually got the DS version, I had this strong desire to play through the original. Maybe the fact that Mario 64 always managed to elude me played into my curiosity of what it would be like to have it for myself. I never did own an N64. When I found out about the Wii Shop channel and saw I could buy Mario 64 digitally and play it directly on my Wii, that option may as well have not existed because at the time, I didn't know about the Wii points cards I could buy at the store, and my parents were very reluctant about putting their credit card information into something they weren't familiar with. Through one of my friends at school, I learned that he was able to play Mario 64 on his home computer through something called Project 64. And best of all, it was free. All I had to do was download this emulator and find a Super Mario 64 ROM somewhere online, maybe through one of these websites. You think she has the ROM? I did eventually manage to get the emulator and game up and running on the family computer. I popped my emulation cherry that day, and I never looked back. All so I could play Mario 64 for a grand total of 5 minutes before saying F this because I hated playing it on a keyboard. For Final Fantasy VII, this was tolerable. For Super Mario 64, this should be a crime. But then, a friend lent me his Wii for a couple of weeks, and it was loaded with virtual console games. And yep, one of them was Super Mario 64. Finally, I could play the original game in its entirety. No more DS version, no more being denied my right to become a virtual console whore, no more moral ambiguity. This was my first full experience with one of the most famous games ever made. It was okay. I had a rough time playing Mario 64. Compared to the other 3D Marios and even the DS version to me at the time, Mario just felt so clunky here. I found that the controls were simultaneously too stiff and too sensitive. And unlike Sunshine and hell, at this point many other games I had played already, the camera didn't flow in the graceful manner I had grown accustomed to in modern 3D games. And that was my stance on the original Mario 64 for many years. It was just okay. I understood its importance in the greater landscape of gaming, but as a 3D Mario in the modern day, I felt that there were much better options. However, as I said, I am now a certified Mario 64 enjoyer. I've seen the light, I've learned the error of my ways, so let's talk about it. Why is Super Mario 64, underneath all those polygons, still a great game? Well, there's your answer. This is still one of the greatest title screens ever conceived. Sure, Xenoblade's title screen may have one of the rawest camera shots in fiction, accompanied by a sweeping orchestral masterpiece of a track that builds and builds to be more grandiose as you see the day transition from morning to night in real time. But I can't give Mario sunglasses. The 3D Mario head is just one example of how Super Mario 64 is almost self-aware in a manner of speaking. Like it knew it was destined to be a bunch of folks' first time playing a 3D game, and so many of its idiosyncrasies reflect this self-awareness. Like yeah, Mario's in 3D now, and it wants you to believe it. It's not an illusion, it's not a prank. You can contort Mario's face to your heart's content, see it's real. All the tutorial signs in the game treat you like a dumb bitch, but that's because if you played this game when it was new, you probably were a dumb bitch. The game can't just have an invisible camera system. No, it needs to be explained and contextualized properly for the audience in the most unnecessary way imaginable. So here's a Lakitu that's filming your entire adventure. That's what the camera is. Why can't every game have this? Where's the fucking cloud turtle? Mario 64's personality is embedded into even its most minute components. It's the kind of charm that is most effective when you take its historical significance and release date into account. Mario himself has become one of the most lovable and recognizable mascots of all time, and I think a strong case can be made that much of his stardom can be traced back to his depiction in 64. Miyamoto was adamant about giving Mario proper emotions and character traits this time around through his animations and such, but the one thing that truly brought him to life was his voice. This was Charles Martinet's debut as the voice of Mario in a mainline game, a role that he kept for almost 30 years. You all know it, you all love it. It is iconic and sells the sense of joy that playing Mario 64 elicits. Running around these levels, jumping on enemies, deleting your save file, breaking the laws of physics, it just wouldn't be the same without all the wahoos and... Thank you, Charles Martinet, for the passion and love you've given the character for so many years, and for saving us from being subjected to the beta voice. The Castle Grounds. What a perfect introduction to the game. I have spent countless hours here. I wouldn't be shocked if my playtime outside of Peach's Castle has surpassed the time I've spent in any other level. There is so much that is subliminally taught in such a deceptively simple area, from the broadest of fundamentals to the smallest of intricacies about the game's controls and Mario's mobility. You move Mario with the analog stick, that's easy enough. You can follow the curved path to the castle's bridge, but I think most of us when playing this for the first time just moved forward and cut through the grass. By doing this, you'll notice that the slight incline slows Mario down, and running in the opposite direction speeds him up. This little bit of terrain demonstrates that Mario has actual weight to him, with realistic acceleration and gradual turning animations that need to be taken into account when moving him. The level geometry plays a big hand in illustrating this, and these two elements form a symbiotic relationship that defines Super Mario 64's entire movement system, and is why it flows so gracefully once you get the hang of it. If a slope is too steep, Mario will lose his footing and slide down it. Most players will instinctively hit the jump button while he's in this belly sliding animation and learn that you can roll out of it. The dive move, which can only be performed once running at a certain velocity, can be rolled out of as well. This dive plus rollout combo is one of Mario's most efficient means of traversal, along with the long jump, and you can chain these different maneuvers together to make your own gameplay feel that much more flashy and personalized to your specific playstyle. Doing the dive right after executing a triple jump or somersault gives you a tremendous boost to your jump arc that opens up even more possibilities. Not to mention that it is incredibly satisfying to pull off, especially if you get the timing just right on the rollout. I mentioned that the dive only works if Mario is moving fast enough. Otherwise, if you press the B button, he'll do a punch if he's grounded that can be followed through for a combo, or a kick if he's in the air. This kick can actually be performed on the ground as well to quickly accelerate from a standstill and reach top speed faster than just fully tilting the analog stick. The kick can also be spammed by holding the A button while continuously pressing B, and this allows you to ascend up some steep, slippery slopes. Slopes like these can also be bypassed if you perform the final part of a triple jump on the slope. By leaping into one of the trees, Mario will grab onto the trunk. He can climb up, slide down, jump off, or do a fancy handstand jump if done off the top of the tree that also sends him higher. In Whomp's Fortress, the tree at the beginning of the level is one of the first instances where you're able to apply this mechanic practically, giving you a way of skipping the side path when going for some of the stars. The water moat outside of the castle is here to give you a taste of the game's swimming mechanics. Water currents are a thing in this game that push Mario with the flow of the water, even if you don't touch the controller. Being underwater for too long drains your life, and resurfacing refills it completely. You can hold the A button to make Mario paddle with his legs, or you can tap the button rhythmically to make him swim faster, something you learn by reading the sign that the moat's current leads you to. There's a blocked off cannon in the castle grounds that doesn't open up until you get every star, but it's here this early on to establish Mario 64 as a game full of secrets and mysteries that are just waiting to be uncovered and shared with others. This is only the first of many secrets. This corner here is one I'm convinced was deliberately designed to trick more seasoned players into believing that if they try hard enough, they can wall jump in a precise way to reach the top of the castle without the need of the cannon. And the funny thing is, it is actually possible, though the process is more complicated than you might expect. For being the first game of its kind, I can't think of a tutorial area that would have been more perfect than these castle grounds. It is a small appetizer of Mario 64's enchanting gameplay and world that's crafted in such a way that appeals to both crowds, those who are new to the game and need a sampling of what's in store for them, and those who are returning to it and want a reminder of the delicious full-course meal that they came back for before fully digging in. Princess Peach's castle has evolved quite a bit over the years, but every iteration is heavily based on the version in 64, and for good reason. From the elegant music piece that echoes through its halls, the hidden entrances to the castle's secret stars like the beam of light in the main lobby that transports you to the wing cap level if you look at it directly. I wonder how many kids Mario 64 is responsible for blinding. The way that star collecting is directly tied to how you progress through the place, starting in the lobby, then unlocking the basement and finally the upstairs areas. Everything about Peach's castle is designed to evoke comfort and nostalgia, that second home you could revisit anytime you want to relax. I would also like to note that compared to other 3D Mario games, namely Sunshine and the Galaxy games, 64 really hits the ground running. You get a short cutscene of Peach reading aloud her letter to Mario and an aerial tour of the outside of the castle, and that's it. You head inside, Bowser tells you to scram because nobody's home, and you do just that. No, you walk inside the castle and can immediately enter the first level, Bob-omb Battlefield. It's a short and sweet opening that definitely appeals to somebody like me, who places a lot of value in the replayability factor of moment-to-moment gameplay-driven experiences like a Mario game or a Metroid or Mega Man game. The game, all in all, has an exquisite pace. In no time whatsoever, you'll be able to explore the other courses found in the lobby, thanks to the low star requirement needed to unlock the doors leading to them. And before you know it, you'll be running through the first Bowser stage. Mario 64 was the first game in the series to use the collectathon-style progression system. Collecting power stars is the name of the game, and having enough of them lets you open the big star doors that lead to the Bowser levels, which upon completion reward you with keys that grant you access to the other tiers of the castle. And each tier holds its own set of levels with another set of power stars to collect. There are stars to be found outside of the game's 15 core levels as well, from the ones you grab by talking to certain toads to the much more elusive secret stars, like the one in the Vanish Cap stage you can enter after draining the moat by ground pounding these two pillars in the basement. The courses in this game look really big at first glance, but they are actually much more condensed than they let on. This means that the objectives, the power stars, are placed within close proximity to one another in most of these levels, which plays into the fast-paced nature of Mario 64. Almost every star in a course is obtainable from the moment you enter. There is a recommended order for collecting the stars that's shown to you each time you hop into a level, but it doesn't need to be followed to a T, which is something that every Collectathon 3D Mario after this did away with until Odyssey came out. You are given a great degree of freedom in how you choose to approach the journey. Out of 120 power stars, 70 are needed to enter the final Bowser level in Tippy, the tip top of the castle. Some courses can be outright ignored if that's what you want, since you can opt to get stars in other courses that you may find to be more fun. And while inside the actual courses, you can choose how many stars you want to grab, as well as which ones to grab. It's all up to you. When going for the intended minimum number of stars required, so 70, these are the levels and stars I typically choose to go after. This is a route that I have adjusted to satisfy my own tastes and preferences after many a playthrough of Mario 64. This game begs to be played multiple times, as any playthrough can offer a wildly different experience from the last depending on the route you take. I have done 70-star runs of this game where I go to every level even if just to get at least 1 star, other runs where I don't get any of the secret stars, and a couple where I've just straight up ignored everything in the castle's later tiers because I'm able to get 70 stars before I even face Bowser in the Fire Sea. Super Mario 64 became as big of a sensation as it did, not just for the freedom that was possible through its movement and how it allowed players to exercise it in these wide open spaces, but also because of the freedom in how you could choose to tackle this huge adventure. Sure, Mario 1 had warp pipes to later worlds, Mario 3 allowed you to interact with the world map and skip some levels every now and again, and Mario World had secret exits that could open up the number of ways you could reach the final area, but Mario 64 was an entirely different beast. It felt liberating, and this untethered structure is part of what made the game so culturally impactful, because it meant that everybody had their own unique account about their individual experience with the game. The freedom that Super Mario 64 allows for can be found in nearly every element of its makeup, right down to the actual construction and layouts of the courses. And it might go without saying, but the greatest courses in Mario 64 are the ones that best accommodate all types of players. Those who want to tackle objectives in order, those who want to be able to progress through the game in a flexible, non-linear manner, and every other kind of player in between. Bob-omb Battlefield does a solid job of conditioning you to how many of the levels in the game after this will play out. You've got 1 or 2 power stars that can only be obtained by selecting the name of it in the menu, like Foot Race with Koopa the Quick, because he only appears in this specific mission, likely to test your abilities and knowledge of the course layout after having already made your way up the mountain in the previous mission to fight King Bob-omb. But like I said, most of the stars in a stage are loaded in already. The first star you're likely to come across is the one behind Chomp's Gate, and I remember this was the very first star I got when I played Mario 64 for the first time. Some power stars in a level might be impossible to obtain though, because you haven't unlocked the right cap for it. Caps being Mario 64's take on the traditional power-up that are, unfortunately, pretty damn situational a good chunk of the time. At least the Metal and Vanish caps are. The Wing cap is readily available in quite a few levels, and can be used to increase your traversal options. I think this kind of application is where the power-up really shines. Not so much when you're asked to be super coordinated with it, like in Mario Wings to the Sky. However, this is a star that can be grabbed before unlocking the Wing cap. With some creativity creativity and a ton of willpower, since you can just use the cannon on the floating island as many times as you need to get the 5 coins in the sky and make the star spawn. It goes to show how stars that may appear to be unattainable in the moment can sometimes still be collected with enough skill and or determination. Into the jet stream ordinarily requires the metal cap so that Mario can walk underwater and withstand the jet stream's force, but with perfect swimming technique, you can obtain it without that power-up. In fact, the metal cap switch is completely skippable, even in a 120 star playthrough. With precise wall jumps, you can clip over the ceiling in Hazy Maze Cave, for example, to press this switch that normally requires Metal Mario's abilities. Whomp's Fortress is accessible right after getting just 1 star in Bob-omb Battlefield, and honestly, the game kinda peaks here in terms of courses. This is my favorite level in the game, and I mean, I don't think I'm the only one who has that opinion. There has to be a reason why this was the level used for the throwback stage in Mario Galaxy 2, right? Whomp's Fortress just has the sauce. It contains almost everything that I love about Mario 64. Level design that features different ways of reaching objectives and encourages you to make the most out of Mario's movement. A world event that occurs after defeating King Whomp, which just makes this place feel a bit more active and alive than some of the other levels in the game. The level features the first appearance of piranha plants in the game, along with the beautiful song that plays when they're asleep. There's fun trivia to learn here, like how this level has the only appearance of bullet bills in all of Mario 64. An easy 100 coin mission, the owl you can find in the tree that takes you up high in the air to drop into the caged island, and some of the coolest unintended star obtaining strategies in the whole game, cannonless and owlless. The only thing that's missing from this course, if I had to pick something, is the level within a level motif that some other courses have. I really like this recurring gimmick in particular. It takes the concept of the secret areas you can find in the castle walls and implements it within the individual courses as well. This concept makes levels like Lethal Lava Land feel much more dense and interesting. Cool Mountain has one of these sub-levels as well, though it's definitely more unique than some of the others. The ice slide you find by entering the chimney here is but one of the game's 3 slide levels. There isn't much to these at face value, but even these linear at first glance set pieces have more depth to them than meets the eye. Princess Peach's slide can be finished in just under 13 seconds if you're quick enough and know about this massive shortcut you can take. The one in Cool Mountain has a shortcut built into it as well. The slide in Tall Mountain can be ignored altogether with smart application of one of Mario's most underrated abilities, the mid-air kick. I brought this move up earlier, but I didn't mention that the kick also doubles as an extra mid-air jump that can come in clutch when you aren't confident that a normal jump will get you over a pit. It isn't a traditional double jump per se, but it is useful for making micro adjustments in the air. It's even possible to decelerate in the middle of a jump arc by tilting the analog stick in the opposite direction of your trajectory so that pressing the B button makes Mario kick instead of dive, and this also allows you to link the second part of a triple jump with another. This can be applied in, say, this section of Bowser in the Sky to completely avoid using the auto-scrolling horizontal platform. Back to Cool Mountain, this is a very vertical stage, and much of its coolness comes from the multitude of ways there are of getting down the mountain. You can slide down by taking this path to the left, take the slide in the chimney to exit out the shack at the bottom of the level, put all of your faith in the speed you build up by sliding down this steep part of the mountain to make it across this chasm, or just stand on the edge of this broken bridge for a bit to be transported to the broken bridge down here. The most famous of these teleporter shortcuts is in Bob-omb Battlefield in this little hole that the cannonballs come out of. But you'd be surprised at just how many of these there are in the game. While working on this video, I even found a new one in Bob-omb Battlefield as well, hidden in this clump of yellow flowers. In Wet Dry World, you don't even have to ride the arrow lifts for this star. You can just teleport up here and drop down to nab it instead. Jolly Roger Bay is one of the game's 2 main water levels, and it is where you'll likely first be exposed to what is quite possibly the best water theme in all of gaming. Jolly Roger Bay isn't one of my favorite courses in 64 if I'm being honest, aside from like 2 or 3 missions here, but the music elevates it so much for me. Saying that it's relaxing honestly doesn't quite cut it. It doesn't accurately explain why I love this track so much. It's the perfect song to sleep to. I like putting it on in the background when I'm working on something, and Mario 64's sound font just fits this track in particular so nicely. This song also plays in the castle's secret aquarium and in Dire Dire Docks, the game's second main water level that has this really memorable world event, where the mesmerizing course entrance gets pushed further back once you board Bowser's sub, revealing the way to the second Bowser level. Returning to the topic of the game's music real quick, the water theme also stands out because of how sparingly it is used. Super Mario 64, like many Mario games before it, doesn't exactly have a wide track selection. Rather, it has a few unique tracks that are each used in not just one level, but in multiple, and similar to its predecessors, Mario 64 makes effective use of its limited list of songs. They are great to listen to on their own and are very malleable. Hazy Maze Cave and Wet Dry World share the same subdued remix of Mario 1's underground theme, and despite these levels being thematically different, the song doesn't feel out of place in either of them. Same goes for the Lethal Lava Land and Shifting Sandland track, the jolly rendition of the main theme for both of the game's snow levels, and, well, the main theme itself. First heard in Bob on Battlefield, is saved for the brighter, cheerier looking levels. Big Boo's Haunt has always been one of my favorite courses, not just because it's set in a haunted house and reminded me a lot of Luigi's Mansion when I first played this game, but because the track that plays here is specially made for it. It is not heard anywhere else in the game, and it makes Big Boo's Haunt the level that left the greatest impression on me as a kid. The piano played its part in that too. I also think Big Boo's Haunt is great at showcasing how genius and methodical Super Mario 64's camera can be, so I'm going to take a bit of a detour to talk about it for a minute. The camera is one of the most contentious aspects about Mario 64 nowadays. It was one of the first of its kind, and in more ways than one, it can't really compete with the camera systems in modern games. In spite of that, there are many scenarios where the camera in this game really shines. Big Boo's Haunt has you exploring claustrophobic, boxed-in rooms that you'll be going in and out of constantly by going through these doors. Each room has its own default camera setup that the camera switches to when you walk into one. These predetermined camera placements aim to give you as much visibility of the current room as it can right from the get-go, without the need for the player to manually readjust the camera themselves every time they switch rooms. This is the game's way of being considerate, automating the work in an effort to give players the ideal camera for any given situation. The developers knew that the camera would be the most foreign and intimidating mechanic in the game for new players back when it first came out. It is consistently the biggest hurdle for people unfamiliar with 3D games. And I know this for a fact from my own experiences of getting family members who were only used to 2D games to try out 3D games. The camera was always their kryptonite, and if they could get away with not moving it, they would. So while playing Mario 64 with no camera adjustments certainly is not the ideal way to play the game almost anticipated that some people would attempt to play this way. As a result, in many of these levels, the camera will automatically track Mario and move into positions it deems most appropriate for capturing as much of the action as it can, while still giving you an informative view of your surroundings. And I feel that this aspect of the camera doesn't get as much praise as it should. It's likely that it's simply easier to notice the ways in which the camera falters, such as its tendency to get caught on physical terrain in the world like walls, or those occasions where it can lose track of Mario and doesn't know how to fix itself without the player's input. And I'm not going to deny it. It can lead to a lot of frustration, and these are valid criticisms of the camera system. The camera was definitely the biggest obstacle for me when I played through the game for the first time. But looking back, a lot of the problems I had with it stemmed from my own mulish refusal to take the time to try to understand how it worked and how to properly direct it. This stubbornness is something I've noticed many, not all mind you, but many new players display as well, leading some of them to conclude that the camera is just bad because it can't be controlled in the same way as a modern camera. But many of these people are the same ones I also notice never press C down to zoom the camera out and widen their field of view, and they are often the same ones I notice neglect Mario Cam, which you activate by pressing the R button. Mario Cam snaps the camera behind Mario, and it does its best job to stay there as you move him. It's not only useful for platforming in a straight line, but it also allows the camera to reorient itself in those instances where it goes out of whack and doesn't respond to the C buttons. Mario Cam is just as important as the default Lakitu Cam, but so many players tend to ignore it. Again, this isn't to say that Mario 64's camera is perfect, but it is definitely misunderstood in many ways. I'd argue that it hasn't aged anywhere near as bad as its reputation would lead most to believe. It's definitely a barrier that many players of today will understandably have a hard time getting over, but those who do can appreciate how intuitive the camera actually is, and how it can be effectively utilized as a tool that is meant to be mastered and not just tolerated. Like many elements in Mario 64, there is more to the camera than it may initially seem. Shifting Sandland and Lethal Lava Land are very boxy in their design, but they're still pretty fun levels to play through. As mentioned earlier, both of them have a smaller sub-level within the main course that adds an additional layer to your exploration as you look for the power stars. In contrast to the flatter starting areas, the insides of the pyramid and volcano are much more vertical and obstacle course-like in design. LLL's Lava Hazard has a trait that later 3D Mario games borrowed as well, where it damages Mario instead of outright killing him like in the 2D games, and the sharp pain sends Mario high in the air like he's a cartoon character. This not only gives you a chance to direct yourself back to land, but it can also be used to take shortcuts and cut through chunks of the level design. The risk is high, but the reward can more than make up for it. Inside of the volcano, this lava boost trick can be used to skip the first moving platform and elevator tour in the volcano, and to skip most of the hike towards the hot-footed into the volcano star. One of the most interesting stars in the game, to me, is found in Shifting Sandland. In the talons of the big bird asks you to grab the star from, well, the talons of the big bird flying around the level. I think what you're supposed to do is stand on one of the pillars that the condor likes to fly around and jump into it to nab the star that way, but you can interact with the bird at any point in its flight path. You can intercept it at the top of the pyramid or within the first couple of seconds of entering the level with a fast leap over this sandy hill in tight movement, using the fly guy to boost yourself toward the bird, or even without the fly guy. You can also try to steer Wingcap Mario to fly into the bird. I love how this mission and many others in the game let you apply your freedom in inventive ways. The replayability factor of Mario 64 doesn't just come from which stars you decide to collect, but also figuring out new methods of obtaining them. I'll say one thing though, if there's one type of star I'll always skip when I'm not doing a 120 star run, it's the 100 coin stars. On paper, it's a sound idea for a star. Get 100 coins in a level to make a star spawn. It can be any 100 coins you want to get, and there is fun to be had mapping out efficient routes for getting them all, except for cases like Jolly Roger Bay's 100 coin mission, where there are only 104 coins in the entire course. So there really isn't much to experiment with here. My disdain for 100 coin missions is largely thanks to courses like Jolly Roger Bay, where the total coin count in the level is really strict, and it's even more of a pain when the coins are scattered everywhere, or when the game's putrid draw distance bites you in the ass by making you think, oh well, there aren't any coins over there, I'll just swim around for another 15 minutes like an idiot looking somewhere else. Oh wait, Hazy Maze Cave is an alright level overall, but the 100 coin mission here freaking sucks because it takes forever. It's a big area and the coins are really spaced apart. And God forbid you miss any of the blue coins in the toxic maze area. I also hate it because of the cruel lesson I learned many years ago about paying attention to where I am when collecting the last coin. And man, does it suck if you die when you're right on the cusp of getting those last few coins. All of that hard work and time flushed down the drain. This might be as good a time as any to talk about Mario 64's boot out system. 100 coin stars are the only stars that let you keep playing in a course after you collect them, which adds a layer of strategy when you're trying to decide what other mission you should pair a level's 100 coin mission with, which I do like. Every other star kicks you out of the current stage after being grabbed though, and this is one of the biggest points of contention I see in discussions about this game. To be completely honest, I've never taken a firm stance in this debate, and I probably never will. I've simply never minded having to exit a level every time I get a star, probably because for the most part, it doesn't take too long to re-enter the level and run to the next star anyways. Over the years, I have found myself sympathizing more with those who are strongly against the boot out system, more so after playing this non-stop mod that does exactly what it sounds like. It keeps you in a level no matter what star you collect. It is fun being able to play this game at such a blazingly fast pace, and it really puts into perspective just how much time is wasted with these boot out sequences in the original. But like, Again, I never did and still don't really mind any of this. And I find that the boot out system motivates me to mix up my route more often. If I was able to stay in a level and collect every star in one go, I'd be less inclined to try a new route each time I revisit the game. But then, I think about Tick-Tock Clock and Rainbow Ride. These courses, I'd say, make a strong case for how the boot out system actively harms the flow of the game. The word I'd use to describe these stages is repetitive, an issue that the boot out system only amplifies. Many of the stars in these levels have you treading old ground over and over again. Their construction is frankly too rigid and too linear, and doesn't leave much room for varied traversal and exploration, at least compared to the other courses in the game. Some would lump Tall Mountain here as well, but it definitely is not as egregious as the other two, since you can spice things up by riding the breeze near the start for a nifty shortcut, or going through the vine-covered red coin maze. There's also the Atop the Lonely Mushroom Star that I always get a kick out of. Call it bad design or whatever, since if you miss the cannon shot, it is very likely that you will lose a life, but you've got to appreciate some bullshit every once in a while for the laughs. Tick-Tock Clock, while being one of the most interesting levels in Mario 64 on a conceptual level, especially with the way you can manipulate the speed of the level's moving obstacles depending on the number the minute hand is pointing at when you enter, feels like the same song and dance no matter what star you're doing, because of how much familiar ground you're needing to cover, no matter the mission. And Rainbow Ride, oh boy. Not only are all of these platforms suspended over the giant bottomless pit that is the sky, but you have to ride this slow as balls carpet for half of the stars in this course. It's not fun, it's not exciting, and with how perilous this level is, you can imagine that getting the 100 coin star here and in Tick-Tock Clock is an absolute bitch. If only I was skilled enough to perform carpetless to, at the very least, not have to meander so much in what is normally the most uneventful mission in the game. What compounds the problems with Tick-Tock Clock and Rainbow Ride even more is the music. Peach's Secret Slide, aka Mario 64's athletic theme, is a great song when used in short bursts, but this track plays incessantly in the final two courses of the game, and my god, it is grating beyond belief and makes these stages even more draining than they already are. It just drones on and on and on until your mind begins to associate the song with tedium and misery and anger after hitting this fucking invisible wall for the fourth time. I don't like these levels very much. I said earlier that the developers were scrambling to stitch the last couple of courses together in time for Mario 64's launch. No, really? I couldn't tell. They are definitely a sour spot in an otherwise solid collection of levels, and it sucks that they're some of the last ones in the game. You know which levels don't suck though? The 3 Bowser levels. Bowser in the Dark World, Bowser in the Fire Sea, and Bowser in the Sky. While there is plenty of platforming in Super Mario 64, it's not the game's main focus, at least nowhere near as much as it was in the 2D titles that preceded this game. And this is where the Bowser stages come in to fill the void. 3 awesome stages that harken back to the traditional, straightforward designs of levels from Mario's previous adventures. Pretty much nothing but intense, gratifying platforming challenges. And all of these levels have incredibly flexible camera control to aid you in the tricky jumps you'll be needing to perform. And the Bowser fights are classic. While Bowser himself looks like a freaking goober, there is something about grabbing him by the tail, spinning the control stick to spin him around, and then letting go to throw him into a bomb, as Mario says, that, while simple, yes, is always immensely satisfying. The track that plays leading up to each Bowser battle, Koopa Road, is the song I think of when Bowser comes to mind. And even though it's gotten some great remixes over the years, notably in the Galaxy games and Galaxy 2 specifically with the addition of a choir in that version of the track, the original Mario 64 rendition is honestly still my favorite one. And then you get this badass, menacing song simply titled Ultimate Bowser for the final battle that's simply perfect. If you ignore the torture on your thumb, that is. Come on, I couldn't possibly talk about Mario 64 without bringing up the Nintendo 64's controller. The two go hand in hand, and yeah, I poked fun at this controller's abhorrent analog stick, and don't get me wrong, it's not a great controller for most games, but for the games it was designed for, oh baby. Even though this stick does unspeakable things to my thumb, the sensitivity and dead zone is tuned just right for Mario in this game. The slightest tilt makes him tiptoe, and there is a gradual, natural escalation to his ground speed the more you tilt the stick. You really gotta push this thing all the way before Mario goes into a full-blown sprint. And of course, the incremental camera makes way more sense when you can control it with buttons instead of a second thumbstick. I'm not saying that using any other controller for this game is unplayable. In fact, some speedrunners opt for Hori mini-pads instead, and pretty much all of them use that controller for Bowser throws because of its GameCube-like control stick. But Mario 64 with an original N64 gamepad just feels right. There's also the notches that surround the analog stick that make precise movements a little easier to execute. Controller notches can be pretty damn crucial to your success in Mario 64, especially if you know how to combine these angles with specific camera setups. Blindfolded runs of the game rely on the notches a lot to move Mario in consistent directions throughout the run, and many speedrun strats like Cannonless are damn near impossible to pull off without a notched controller. You'd be amazed at how hard it is to hold straight down in this game. The only other courses I haven't gone into detail about are Snowman's Land, an ice level with a wider, more open playing field than Cool Cool Mountain, Tiny Huge Island, a level that toys with the World 4 concept from Mario 3, where there are two versions of the course, one big and one small, that you can swap between by entering these warp pipes within the stage, and you can choose which version to start playing in by jumping into either the big or small paintings in the castle. This is also the home of the last non-Bowser boss in the game, Wiggler. Mario 64 has a couple of bosses, but none of them are anything too remarkable, honestly. Their dialogue is amusing, but fighting them is nothing to write home about. Anyways, Tiny Huge Island, huh? What's next? The level called Wet Dry World? Those cheeky bitches. The remaining main level, Wet Dry World, is rather infamous for multiple reasons. In terms of its design, you can definitely see signs of Mario 64's troubled late development here. I never liked how the intended way to reach the elevated sections of the stage is by making these guys fling you to the higher platforms. What ends up happening is that Mario's getting up animation after he gets flung leaves him completely defenseless, and he can end up being flung again by another one of these dudes. It takes control away from the player and isn't very pleasant. Gee, I sure hope this annoying mechanic doesn't return in future Mario games. There's also the town area that, even when I was a kid, I always thought felt out of place with these weird Zelda-looking ass buildings. These are assets that were shared with Ocarina of Time after all. And then there's the whole negative emotional aura that allegedly permeates from Wet Dry World. It's this sensation that many players since the game's launch have reported feeling while in this level. The unorthodox layout, the music, the strange town, the peculiar skybox that has since been discovered to be an image of an actual town in Yemen, all supposedly coalesce to create this sense of uneasiness. Personally, even though I've always thought the town was weird, I'd be lying if I said I've experienced this negative aura for myself. But there is one area in the game that certainly unsettled me: the endless stairs. Unlike the other star doors in the game, the 70 star door in Tippy that leads to the final boss opens up even if you don't have 70 stars. Problem is, if you enter, you'll find that the stairs are endless, an illusion achieved simply by resetting Mario's position on the stairs every couple of steps. This illusion, the unsettling piano notes that seem to increase in pitch the farther you run, the foreboding black void of nothingness that awaits you at the top, just out of reach, freaked me the hell out. It preyed on my fear of dark, cramped rooms, creepy music, and I distinctly remember fearing that if I ran up the stairs long enough and turned around, they'd remain endless even on the way down, that I'd be trapped here forever. Maybe this castle isn't as welcoming as I initially thought. At times it can feel familiar and comforting, but other times it can feel completely foreign, downright eerie and spine-chilling. Mario 64 nails the whole liminal spaces aesthetic masterfully. It's that phenomenon where a piece of media mainly targeted towards children can come off as this creepy, subversive piece of art that feeds on the wild imaginations of young kids. which, mind you, I'm sure wasn't done on purpose. I'm just bringing this up because it's fun to talk about. But it's not like I'm the only one who thinks this, and it's too widespread to just be a coincidence, right? What if all of this was by design? A video game can be considered timeless for many different reasons. Maybe a game is timeless in a mechanical sense, where the facets of its design and gameplay are so polished that it can stand toe-to-toe with modern releases. A game can be timeless on a technical level, a presentational level, but what makes a game, or any piece of art for that matter, maintain relevance more than anything is tried and true, active discussion. And with the medium of video games in particular, mysteries, unanswered questions, and our own perpetual desire for our favorite games to be never-ending, our wish to keep the fun going, drives discussion like nothing else. I can't think of many games that have managed to generate a long-running history of myths, rumors, and conspiracies quite like Super Mario 64 has. At least not many that have garnered this much intrigue and popularity. Mario 64 came out when the more social side of the internet was just beginning to take off. People suddenly had this outlet where they could share legitimate discoveries about games just as easily as they could fabricate made-up stories about a hidden 121st star, a way to ride Yoshi like in Super Mario World, or some other bullshit secret with unlock requirements so ludicrous that only the most curious and dedicated of individuals would even attempt to check the validity of these claims. Keep in mind, this was also during a time where many games did have cryptic unlock requirements for things like characters, modes, and when developers liked including hidden areas in their games that no normal player would ever be able to discover on their own without outside knowledge. It only made the fake Mario 64 rumors that spawned that much more difficult to detect, especially by a gullible, young demographic. And this is all without taking into account that, remember, one of the most appealing parts about Mario 64 was its treasure trove of secrets in Peach's castle. Who's to say there wasn't a cornucopia of others left to discover? Super Mario 64 had already cemented itself as something that felt larger than life, a technical impossibility, a boundary-shattering work of art. It brought Mario into the third dimension, and it was good. Who knows what else it was capable of? Maybe the negative aura of Wet Dry World was intentional. Maybe the eeriness was deliberately baked into the game. When you mix real, factual bits of information with made-up ones, throw in some beta images and footage into the concoction as well while you're at it, during a time where it was common for pre-release footage of games to look wildly dissimilar to the final products, when there were few ways to actually prove what was real and what wasn't, because it's not like the source code was readily available for people to dissect and point to as evidence at the time, you get an iceberg. And Mario 64's Iceberg is undoubtedly one of the most well-known for all the reasons I just laid out. Delving deep into this iceberg, it's downright schizophrenic. Talk of shared nightmares, Wario apparitions, supposed cover-ups involving Lavender Town Syndrome and the lost Polybius arcade machine, two other notorious video game urban legends, and then there's haunted dirt texture. This particular iceberg is so effective because its contents are made up of this perfect blend of both real and speculatory tidbits of info, almost blurring the line that separates reality from fantasy. Considering that many of us grew up with this game as kids and that it's common for people to not really remember much about their childhoods, can we really know for certain that nobody has had first-hand experience with one of these anomalies? Just look at the Mandela effect. There are thousands of people who swear up and down that the Monopoly guy always had a monocle, or that the Kit Kat logo always had a hyphen. Like, I know the tip of Pikachu's tail was black. I will not stand for this erasure. This all connects to one statement that attempts to give credibility to every personal account, every rumor that has ever been shared about the game, explaining how they could very well all be true. Every copy of Mario 64 is personalized. I mean, they're not wrong. My copy has a coffee stain on the ESRB rating. Okay, to drop the semi-serious tone I've been using in the last couple of paragraphs for a bit, the iceberg is just one big meme post that manifested from decades of theories and hearsay about Super Mario 64. It's an amalgamation of bits and pieces of the most active parts of our imaginations. But that doesn't mean that this isn't one of the most amusing things that the internet has conjured up. The iceberg and the personalization theory, which, to clarify, refers to an alleged personalization AI that Nintendo coded into Mario 64 that tweaks various properties of the game over time to align with a player's own tastes and personality, essentially allowing any copy of the game to adapt and evolve based on who currently owns it, have spawned all sorts of amazingly creative projects in their wake. These include, but are not limited to, entire recreations and interpretations of the game's beta build, an ARG video series captured in a found footage style, focusing on the horror side of the iceberg that was no doubt inspired by the creepypasta boom from the early days of YouTube, and these unsettling anti-piracy screens which, in and of themselves, have spiraled off into an entirely separate subcategory of analog horror. I want to highlight the beta projects a little more. There are a couple of these out there, and the basic idea is that they attempt to recreate Mario 64's beta from all the pre-release footage and images that we have access to, right down to Mario's uncanny voice clips and these odd textures and models that didn't make it into the final game. But one of these projects in particular takes it a step further, or rather I should say many steps further, plunging layers and layers deep into the most abstract and unsettling parts of the iceberg. B3313 is an experience that can best be described as a fever dream. I don't want to go into specifics because I'd rather you all check it out for yourselves if you haven't already. Much like PT, it is best experienced if you go in knowing as little as possible. But fair warning, and I'm being serious here, playing this for an extended length of time gave me a minor headache due to the downright psychedelic nature of the hack. That being said, it is confusing and mind-bending in the best possible ways. And if you're a fan of psychological horror, I implore you to play this. It is astounding just how far the community has taken the meme. In mid-2020, talk about the iceberg was everywhere, and the creations inspired by the phenomenon made it all the more enthralling. It is an entertaining and fascinating part of the game's history. While Mario 64 didn't invent the iceberg parody genre, it sure as hell played a big role in popularizing the use of this format for exploring and sharing the lesser-known parts of our favorite pieces of media. Not every fan-made project about Super Mario 64 spawned from the iceberg, however. God no. For years now, the game's potential has been expanded via ROM hacks and such that breathe new life into Mario 64, with brand new custom levels, gameplay mechanics, playable characters, and all sorts of other wacky things. There are also fully fledged fan games inspired by Mario 64. The one that I always think of is Super Mario 63. I remember coming across it one day when searching for free online Mario games on Google, and man, I may not have been a fan of using a keyboard to play fast-paced games like platformers, but I put up with it for Mario 63. It is a pseudo-reimagining slash pseudo-sequel to Mario 64, only in 2D and with the addition of mechanics from Sunshine like the Flood Water Pack. You even collect Shine Sprites as the main collectible. This game is crazy impressive. It preserves a lot of the movement from 64, and it's really cool seeing how some of the level design was translated and or redone to work within a 2D platformer. I remember being shocked at just how meaty the game was too. This was the web browser Mario game I brought up at the beginning of the video that I would play in the computer lab in elementary school, and I liked it so much that I would also play it on our computer at home. While controlling Mario with a keyboard did make things pretty difficult for me, I still remember getting pretty far, at least I think I did, and I still never made it to the end. And of course, there are the hundreds upon hundreds of ROM hacks that have been made for Mario 64. Two that I remember seeing people play all the time were the Chaos edition of the game that randomly activates a random cheat code while you play to make the game behave in absurd ways, and the Green Stars ROM hack. This expansion sports 130 completely new stars, assets, and textures not found in the vanilla game. Did I mention that the levels are all new and built from the ground up as well? If only the Green Star portion of Galaxy 2 had this much effort put in. opinion, there are just way too many of these hacks to highlight. Some of my favorites that I've found in the last couple of years are Captain Falcon 64, a hack that lets you play the game as everyone's favorite Smash character, complete with a Falcon punch that destroys enemies and bosses. Shotgun Mario 64 adds a shotgun to Mario's moveset, and it is unironically one of the most ingenious implementations I've seen of a gun in a video game. Not only can you decimate enemies and even easily beat the game with 0 stars, since this hack also removes the key checks from the base game that prevented you from skipping past the locked doors in the castle, but the shotgun blast also acts as an extra jump when used in mid-air, and it harmonizes so well with the rest of Mario's movement options. This ROM hack based on Super Mario Odyssey puts Cappy in the game along with his ability to possess enemies. Mario's Odyssey moveset is implemented here as well. The roll, the spin jump, the ground pound jump, and yes, Cappy bounces are preserved here as well. Recently, Mario Builder 64 was released, and this just absolutely blows my mind. It's a Mario 64 level creator, akin to Nintendo's very own Super Mario Maker. This is sort of what I thought Mario Maker 2 was gonna be before that game even got announced. It is shockingly intuitive as well, not to mention cool as hell that this is a ROM hack that can even be played on original hardware. Super Mario 64 has enjoyed a long and healthy lifespan thanks to the fans, those who took Yoshi's words at the end of the game to heart. The fun, indeed, hasn't ended with Mario 64, thanks to these hacks, thanks to the conspiracies, thanks to the speedrunning, and just when it seemed that the wealth of potential that this game had was nearly tapped out, it happened. Nintendo's worst nightmare. Super Mario 64 in widescreen. Super Mario 64 was successfully reverse engineered. Fans had fully decompiled the game, and it was now natively playable on PC, and was also eventually ported to everything, like the 3DS, with support for stereoscopic 3D to boot. Give it a shot. After all, the 3DS is surprisingly easy to hack. Mario 64 had officially reached its ultimate form. There were no more limits, no more restrictions. You thought that ROM hacking was already pushing what was possible with this game? The Super Mario 64 PC port completely opened the floodgates and offered new and exciting ways to experience a familiar adventure. Of course, the PC port allows you to customize the graphics in ways that keep Nintendo up at night. Widescreen support, ultra-wide support. The resolution can be bumped all the way to 8K, and the frame rate is uncapped, which is freaky as hell, man. This game isn't supposed to look and feel this smooth. It's supposed to look like this. Like ass. Fans have created all these wonderful looking custom textures, level assets, and models for the PC port, effectively giving us the Super Mario 64 remake many of us thought we were going to get in the 3D All-Stars collection. I freaking love the Render 96 project because it makes the game's graphics resemble the official artwork. It's so good. There are even versions of the port with full ray tracing support for players with RT capable graphics cards. And let me tell you, you have not experienced bliss if you haven't seen Jolly Roger Bay with ray tracing. There are also a bunch of QOL features like an optional revamped camera system that does its best job at replicating analog camera control, options to make the controls a little more precise if that's what you want, new collectibles to look for with added unlockables, and sure, a lot of these things were possible prior to the PC port via ROM hacking, but this version of Mario 64 has only extended the game's life even more. The PC port ushered in a new era for Mario 64, and since it's an open source project, it has drawn in even more talented artists and developers who continue to make this nearly 30-year-old game better than it's ever been. And the ongoing support doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. Look no further than Super Mario 64 Co-op Deluxe to see just how far this game has come. This is a fork of the PC port that, as the name suggests, adds cooperative multiplayer. 2 or more players can now play Super Mario 64 together online and run around in the same castle, help each other collect stars, even beat the piss out of each other. Features like proximity chat and the slew of playable characters there are to choose from now only amplify the fun. And with mods, you can expand the character roster even more. You've got Sephiroth, Freddy Fazbear, Kazuma Kiryu, and holy crap, is that Peter Griffin?
No freaking way!
And really, the best part about this mod, every one of these mods for that matter, is just the fact that when all is said and done, this is still Super Mario 64. Yeah, no shit, right? Couldn't you tell? The spirit of the original game isn't lost with these mods. As a reminder, much of what made Mario 64 so great was the freedom it gave you to make your own fun. To use Co-op Deluxe as an example again, invite some buddies into the game and you have what is, no joke, one of the best multiplayer games I have ever experienced. I even taught my friends how to do BLJs when we played together. Look at them. Pathetic. The Mario 64 PC port and the thriving ROM hacking scene that preceded it, more than anything, demonstrate just how solid the foundation of the base game is and how adaptable it is, no matter the context. The original game is a sandbox, a playground where you can let your imagination run wild. And that's what makes the modding scene for this game so special. It provides an avenue for said wild ideas and scenarios to become a reality. The cut co-op mode from the original, it's no longer a pipe dream. The L is real star statue, well, it is real now. Sort of, thanks to mods. What was the deal with that statue though? I mean, we all know the L is real 2401 rumor, right? It mainly spread out of a false sense of hope and to trick unknowing fans into believing that Luigi was actually in the game. But Nintendo themselves confirmed long ago that, simply put, Luigi just didn't make it into the game's official release due to time constraints and the N64's memory limitations, and he was cut along with the planned multiplayer mode. And they also debunked the theory that the texture on the star statue held some kind of hidden message for players to decipher. It didn't. It was just gibberish. But as humans, our innate need to find answers in the unknown and to be able to explain the obtuse can trump anything. The L is real anomaly became a staple of Mario 64's legacy, transcending the game itself, with some foolishly clinging on to the hope that Nintendo was just bamboozling us and that the younger brother was in Mario 64, somewhere, just waiting to be found. The character himself seemed to have this aura of secrecy about him for a while there. Luigi's standalone adventure on the GameCube, Luigi's Mansion, was a game that placed a lot of emphasis on uncovering secrets and solving the mansion's many mysteries. In Smash Bros., Luigi was a hidden character that needed to be unlocked in every Smash game, until Smash Wii U in 2014, where he was finally part of the default roster. In Melee specifically, one of the methods for unlocking Luigi requires you to finish the first stage in adventure mode with a 2 in the second digit of the seconds part of the timer. And in the mainline games, Luigi wasn't anywhere to be found in Super Mario Sunshine either. He could be unlocked early in New Super Mario Bros. On the DS with a cheat code, and he was your reward in Super Mario Galaxy for beating the game with 120 stars. I wouldn't be surprised if all of these examples of Luigi being the mysterious and absent brother were intentional on Nintendo's part as a way for them to get in on the fun, knowing just how much Luigi's exclusion from Mario 64 still lingered in the minds of fans. But then, in July of 2020, in an event we now refer to as the Giga Leak, a gold mine of classified files from Nintendo's servers were anonymously posted on the internet, containing a wealth of forbidden knowledge, such as documentation referencing canceled Nintendo games, never before seen screenshots, art, beta contents, developer tools, and most damning, source code from multiple games. And one of those games was Super Mario 64. And hidden deep within the game's files, there was an unused model of Luigi. This was the fucking holy grail of gaming mysteries. Amidst the overcrowded pool of conspiracies filled with brain diagrams, floating Wario heads, metal Mario textures, and a bunch of other fake nonsense, one of these rumors actually turned out to be true, and it just so happened to be the granddaddy of them all. L was real. Luigi was in Super Mario 64. Finally, the myth could be put to rest. What do you mean he's been in the game for 20 years?
Me, Mario.
Yes, as we all probably know by now, Luigi technically did find his way into Super Mario 64 well before the Giga Leak, only 8 years after the original game's release, when Super Mario 64 DS came out in 2004. Super Mario 64 DS gets a bit of a bad rap. At the same time, it kinda deserves it. It is a remake of Mario 64 that came to be because 20 years ago, holy sh**, 20 years ago? Nintendo wanted to prove that the Nintendo DS was capable of running 3D games. Since its release in 2004, it has since gone down as one of the worst remakes ever made, which I understand where that comes from, and also think it's a bit of a harsh assessment. Mario 64 DS is not without its faults, God no. But there are enough good ideas here to convince me why some people look back on this version fondly, and in some cases, even prefer it over the original. I mean, like I said, this was the first version of the game I owned and completed, and even before that, I would play it a lot on my cousin's DS, years before I owned one. I think there is merit to this game, while also concurring with the consensus that there is quite a bit going against it as well. So why exactly is this remake so divisive? Well, there you have it. Mario 64, the game that made the analog stick a mainstay on every home console controller that followed the N64, is now on a system without an analog stick. Well, just play the game on a 3DS and boom, problem solved, ha 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 ha. I can't take this much longer. Let me be candid here for the people in the back who legitimately think this is a clever gotcha. Super Mario 64 DS was not programmed to support analog movement. Playing the DS version in its vanilla form with an analog method of input, be it the circle pad on the 3DS or a thumbstick on a regular controller via emulation or on the Wii U Virtual Console, does not fix the issues with the game's controls. It does not magically make it feel like the original or like the other 3D Mario games. Let's put this misconception to bed. For the love of God, I'm so tired. On that note, Super Mario 64 DS's controls also aren't subpar simply because it's Mario 64 played with a D-pad. It's not that straightforward, because 3D All-Stars lets you play with a D-pad as well, and it feels nothing like 64 DS. The fact that there is a dedicated button for running isn't the problem either. They both contribute to the crux of the issue, but these two individual elements in and of themselves are not solely responsible for the game's shortcomings in the controls department. The bottom line is this: the underlying physics and feel of the game are much different than in the original. Different in such a way that it is arguably worse and more frustrating than the original, at least to those of us who have grown accustomed to how the original plays. Because here's the thing, I'll be the first to admit that I didn't notice the stiffness of the controls on 64 DS until after I became more acclimated to the original game's physics. At the very least, the disparity between the two versions wasn't as obvious to me before that. It just goes to show how new experiences can make us reevaluate certain things and realize why we might not like something as much as we used to, and vice versa. So yeah, I don't like how this game feels to play, and I think it is vastly inferior to the 1996 original. Because there is no analog movement, Mario & Company's ground control is noticeably more sluggish. Just take a look at the footage on the screen. Even as an observer, you can see just how much heavier the movement is in 64 DS, and it sure as hell feels heavier when playing too. Some actions you think would be easier with the updated controls still come with their own sets of challenges as well. While you can now reliably walk slowly by just holding down a direction on the D-pad instead of needing to deal with the much less consistent act of slowly and precisely tilting an analog stick just enough to prevent Mario from transitioning into a jog, something about the character's acceleration and momentum in 64 DS makes it just as easy to make mistakes in narrow spaces even when walking. And don't even think about trying to turn around. Jumping has this odd tendency of locking you into a certain direction, giving you little to no influence over your jump after it has been executed. And while the camera is better in this version, you seem to be given greater control over it, I hate that the camera controls are now on the touchscreen. Making camera adjustments just doesn't feel very good. In my experience, these retooled controls and physics only exacerbate the clunkiness that was already present in the original. The difference is that, unlike the original, I have been unable to tame the beast that is Super Mario 64 DS. I did a whole 150-star playthrough of this game for this video, and by the time I collected that last star, I didn't feel that I had improved even one bit from when I had 0 stars. These physics are just too wonky for me to adjust to. I really tried, but I just couldn't do it. The fact that 64 DS needed to be designed to accommodate the system's lack of an analog stick single-handedly hurt this remake in the long run. But wait, the 64 DS fan shouts, you can just use the stylus controls for analog movement if you don't want to deal with a digital D-pad. Aw, don't like using a spoon for your pasta? Just use your hands. The controls are this version's fatal flaw, which I know has been said many times, but I hope I have at least done a good enough job clarifying how they're flawed with specific examples. The last thing I wanted to do was chalk it all up to 3D game with a D-pad equals bad, because there's more to it than that. It's such a shame too, because if the controls were better, this would probably be the best version of the game by default, with the new content and updated presentation and all. At least to most people. My grievances with 64 DS don't stop with the controls. For one, the presentation. The audio is just flat out worse. Songs and sound effects sound terribly compressed across the board, and the visuals are also a mixed bag in my opinion. They're better than the original in the sense that the devs had better modeling technology to work with on the DS, resulting in character models that are not only more detailed, but that also accurately reflect how the Super Mario cast looked at the time in official artwork. Just look at Bowser, I mean, my god, bro needs to share his skincare routine ASAP. However, yeah, the lower resolution is pretty off-putting. The game just looks incredibly pixelated, and I don't know, the vibes are just off here, man. Many areas, while packed with more detail, feel flatter and not as whimsical as they did on the N64, usually because of the remake's use of less saturated colors. And I think I've mentioned this more than a couple of times on the channel by now, but I just have a soft spot for those primitive N64 era renders and the art styles from that period of gaming. It's ugly in many ways, but charming nonetheless. This technically looks better, but this will always be more visually interesting to me, witnessing the compromises that needed to be made to make Mario 64 run on that older hardware. The DS version is missing that sort of appeal, and I know a lot of people won't agree with that, but I don't give a shit. This is my video. I'll tell you what isn't missing though. Power stars. Super Mario 64 DS adds 30 brand new stars to the game, and holy hell, these are kinda lame. An overwhelming majority of the new stars are from the Switch Star and Silver Star missions. Step on the switch and run to the star before time runs out, or collect the 5 silver stars scattered throughout the level. So these are just red coin missions again. What makes these new missions even lamer is that sometimes they just shamelessly replace stars from the original. I don't think swapping out the original's Pit and the Pendulum star for a Switch Star adds any more worth to the objective or anything. In the case of the Silver Star missions that do something similar, it just means there's now one more star in the level that can only be obtained if it is directly selected on the star select screen. Normally, you could complete Pyramid Puzzle whenever you wanted to in the original Shifting Sandland, but because 64 DS replaces the secrets with silver stars that only appear in their respective mission, that's no longer possible. I don't think needing to catch 8 silver rabbits that have a random chance of spawning around the castle for a new star is very fun. These few new courses are not the greatest, and most of the time just have the copy and paste Switch Star and Silver Star stars to collect. This new level right here in the courtyard? What in the hell am I looking at here? I thought you couldn't get more abstract than Wet Dry World, but here we are. Now, to be fair, some of these courses were never intended to be fleshed out single player levels, which just makes me question why they were included in the single player then. This abomination and the level based on Super Mario Sunshine, for example, and by based on Super Mario Sunshine I mean it's tropical themed and has Delfino Plaza music, Go Nuts, were designed as multiplayer stages first and foremost. I unfortunately couldn't try out the multiplayer for this video, though that might be for the best from what I've heard about it from others and from my own memories of it. This was actually how the game was first unveiled. It wasn't always Super Mario 64 DS. The project started its life as Super Mario 64 by 4. So Super Mario 256. Coincidentally, that's also the number of fucks I give about this game's multiplayer. Let's see. What else is there? Wario! One of Super Mario 64 DS's biggest selling points was that it would let you play as not just Mario, but also Yoshi, Luigi, and Wario, each sporting their own playstyles and abilities. You even start the game out as Yoshi and have to rescue the other 3 characters, and some stars in the game have been modified to take advantage of the new characters' abilities. This is really cool. Ah, there it is. While it is neat to have these characters playable in Super Mario 64, especially when you take all of the rumors about the original into account, their inclusion in practice hurts the game in a couple of ways. The main problem is that the character switching ends up feeling more like an obligation rather than a novelty or fun bonus because of the way these characters were integrated into the game. Many stars now require a certain character's ability, as I mentioned, like Yoshi's Fire Breath, Mario's Wall Kick because nobody else can do it for some damn reason, Luigi's Invisibility. Wait. Mario could already turn invisible in the original with the Vanish Cap. The metal transformation is also now something only Wario has access to, because I guess this is how they chose to justify having more than one character? The thing is, these rules and restrictions that were previously non-existent just end up backfiring. When you have power-ups that were already situational and now make them exclusive to certain characters, it makes me alternate between the characters more so because I have to for some stars now, and not so much because I actually want to try out that character. I would have preferred if the game was beatable from beginning to end with anyone, like in 3D World. Yeah, this probably means I'd stick with Luigi most of the time because of this ridiculous backflip and, well, he is Christ. But who cares? Just let me decide who I want to play as. Also, while I like the idea of swapping between characters by entering through their doors in this room, it's kinda cute, and the remodeled Peach's slide room from the original adds to the meta-contextual side of this remake that I admittedly am a big fan of. Just give me a character select option when jumping into a stage, man. Don't make this a Yoshi exclusive feature. I don't want to make the trip back here every time I want to not play as Wario. Deadass, if there was a character select screen, I'd probably play as Wario more than I normally do, just for the heck of it. Even if I don't like how slow and fucking atrocious he feels to play as, I mean, Jesus. I feel like I'd be more inclined to use him in spite of that if the process of switching to him was as convenient as touching his face in a menu. Sometimes I like playing as a dog shit character in a video game, but relegating said dog shit character and everyone else to this one room all but guarantees that Wario will only see the light of day when I need to use his dump truck ass to break any of the 10,000 black bricks this version added. They also made the hitboxes of Mario and Luigi's punches unusually tiny just to give this thick bastard more purpose. At the end of the day though, I'd rather have these characters here than not have them at all. I just wish they weren't implemented in such a way that subtracts from the original's freeform feeling of progression. Same goes for these extra power stars and courses too, I guess. This is the most complete version of Super Mario 64, and that's something that will never be taken away from 64DS. For Christ's sake, it's got a whole ass minigame collection on the side that's somehow better than the main game. Okay, that's partially a joke. These minigames are honestly a great time, and I love that the process of unlocking them all is tied to the campaign. Each playable character has a set of rabbits that they can catch around Peach's castle, and catching one unlocks a new minigame that can be accessed through the rec room or the main menu. Luigi's Casino minigames are fan favorites and may or may not be responsible for some of the gambling addicts that live among us today. Nintendo, filling their fans' lives with happiness, joy, and life-ruining habits. Honestly though, I've personally had more of a soft spot for the more arcadey games in this selection. Sport or Splode is really addictive, there are a bunch of great puzzle games here as well, but Wanted is undeniably my favorite minigame of them all. I remember spending hours on this as a kid, always struggling to locate Luigi's devious ass. I swear, Luigi always gave me the most trouble and it felt like he was wanted every other round. Even in the version of Mario 64 he's officially playable in, he's still a bitch to find. Speaking of, finding him and the other unlockable characters in the main story is one of my favorite things about the remake. Mario, Luigi, and Wario all have new mini courses and boss fights tied to them that need to be defeated to earn the key that unlocks the rooms they're trapped in. For Mario, you need to fight King Goomba from the first Paper Mario game. For Wario, you need to fight this guy for some reason. But for Luigi, not only is his painting the only one hidden within a level, Big Boo's Hunt, and not in Peach's castle, not only is this thematically appropriate for the character when taking his own series of games into account, but the boss fight here is King Boo, the main villain in the Luigi's Mansion games. And this also makes his line about Mario having defeated him once before in the first Luigi's Mansion game make more sense if you treat Mario 64 DS as the game that canonically precedes Luigi's Mansion 1. Or we can just keep pretending that Sunshine is a prequel to that game. I don't fucking know. I hate Nintendo timelines. This is additional content that feels thoughtful and substantial. It contextualizes 64 DS as one of the most ambitious remakes of all time in a way that makes sense for the kind of game Mario 64 is often remembered as, a game full of mystifying secrets, which leads me to quite possibly my favorite star in all of Super Mario 64. Once Luigi is unlocked, you in turn unlock the Vanish ability. This power-up lets you run through grates and such, and curiously enough, you're able to activate it in the Snowman's Land room, courtesy of this power flower. Now this room was always one of the most interesting in the original game. It's one of the few times you can physically see the Lakitu cam thanks to the reflection on the large mirror here. This mirror is also what clues you in on the entrance to the Snowman's Land room. The level's painting is only visible when looking in the mirror, in this other dimension, you could say. Mirrors have a vast history rooted in superstition. In many tales and folklore, mirrors hold a special purpose, a symbolic meaning that we can't really ascertain. Some say they possess the reflection of one's soul, show one's true nature, reveal objects that are invisible to the naked eye like in the game, or are conduits that lead to other worlds, gateways into other planes of existence. In Super Mario 64 DS, thanks to the Power Flower, you can turn invisible and walk through the mirror, not just letting you enter the Wario painting, but also letting you do this. Man, I thought it was gonna be Waluigi. This star encapsulates everything that makes the iceberg I discussed previously so alluring. A star that can only be obtained in a specific version of the game. A version of the game that not everybody who has played Super Mario 64 has experienced, and a star that's obtained by walking through a goddamn mirror. This alone makes 64 DS a worthy companion to the original in my heart. And it's partially why I gave the Switch stars and Silver stars such a hard time. If they leaned in more on the wacky and mysterious side of Mario 64 for the new stars, I would have been singing a different tune. As it stands, Super Mario 64 DS is a fine version of the game. If this is the version of the game you prefer and or grew up with, then in my book, you've played Super Mario 64. I'm not gonna lambaste anybody or try to discredit their experience just because I vastly prefer the original. That love I have for the original, as I said in the very beginning of the video, wasn't always there. I had to learn to love Mario 64. I had to learn to love its eccentricities, look past its flaws, and appreciate its masterfully crafted movement. So to end this lengthy retrospective, it's high time we examine the game's movement a little closer and how speedrunning is what ultimately instilled the adoration I currently have for Super Mario 64. Much like with the camera, it is easy to dismiss the way Mario moves in his 3D debut as a product of its time. I already talked about how natural and fluid his movement feels, especially when compared to other attempts that were made at 3D control around the time of Mario 64's release, and I've outlined the surplus of acrobatic options Mario has at his disposal, and how satisfying it is to use his athletic prowess to discover new ways to explore the game's levels. But when you compare 64 Mario to, say, his Odyssey counterpart, Odyssey Mario can also move acrobatically and with such sublime elegance. The key difference is that Odyssey Mario isn't as clunky or clumsy as some would describe 64 Mario. Clunky in the sense that you can't reorient his mid-air jump that much, there isn't an input buffer to make timed actions like triple jumps easier to pull off, and clumsy in the sense that he slips and slides on even the tiniest inclines, does this awkward and often fatal wide turnaround if you move the analog stick in the opposite direction he's facing, if he's carrying even the slightest bit of momentum, and bonks on walls like a dumbass more often than the three blind f***ing mice. Also, this can happen. with great mobility comes great opportunity to mess up or die in ways that feel like it's the game's fault and not so much your own. In the 3D Marios that followed 64, Mario's control is calibrated in a manner that mitigates the chances of players messing up in the ways that are possible in 64, creating a noticeably less frustrating gameplay experience. To bring him up again to illustrate my point, Odyssey Mario frankly controls like a dream, and I always feel like I am in full control of the character. He doesn't react to inclines so violently, he doesn't carry a crap ton of momentum, which makes stopping on a dime and turning much more snappy and reliable, and there are so many other details about Odyssey's mechanics and almost every other 3D Mario that makes them more approachable than 64. Even Sunshine. It's just that that game's problem is that it's held together by bits of string with a dash of you. At the same time, the same irritating quirks from 64 that Odyssey and the other 3D Marios did away with in favor of a more accessible and sanitized movement system are the very reason that Mario 64 has as high of a skill ceiling as it does. It has more room for gameplay creativity via its movement than many other games to this very day, even if it comes at the cost of being less easy to pick up and play. Let's take Mario 64's unorthodox wall jump for example. Later Mario games had Mario slide down the wall with a special animation to indicate that he is able to jump off of it. It is visually clear and the timing is very forgiving. In Mario 64, there is no sliding animation. You have to press the jump button within a couple of frames of Mario making contact with the wall for the wall kick to work. This has been written off by many, including my past self, as a poorly aged mechanic. It's unusual and it was retooled for future installments, so that must mean that it's objectively bad, right? Not necessarily. The unconventional nature of 64's wall kick is exactly what makes it possibly the most versatile incarnation of the maneuver in the whole series. The trajectory and speed Mario travels at when kicking off of the wall depends on the frame that you hit the A button. A first frame wall kick, or firsty for short, is much different than a fourth frame wall kick, and certain pro level strategies and tricks can only be performed with a specific type of wall kick. To an average player, this may feel archaic and inconsistent, but to somebody who understands the inner workings of the game, this can be used to further expand what Mario is capable of. In a game like Odyssey, where the wall jump's arc and speed are fixed for the sake of consistency, the move, in an attempt to be more accessible, became less expressive. Also, the fact that you need to technically bonk on a wall to jump off of it in 64 means that it is possible to follow a long jump with a wall kick, something that no other Mario game after this allows you to do. And there are plenty of other cases of things that are possible in Mario 64 not being possible in other 3D Mario games. At the risk of oversharing how much of a Metroid freak I am, I'm going to raise an analogy I'd like you all to ponder for a bit. Mario 64 is the Super Metroid of the Mario series. Both are games that have been criticized by modern audiences for their quote-unquote outdated clunky controls that don't hold a candle to their successors. I hear it all the time. I can't play Super Metroid because Samus is so floaty and feels weird to control. They should remake the game to feel more like Zero Mission or Dread. And I've heard similar stuff said about Mario 64. For both of these games, I respect that sentiment, while also thinking that it comes off as a little misinformed. What else do Super Metroid and Mario 64 have in common? I'll tell you, they are both regarded as the creme de la creme in their respective series when it comes to their freedom of gameplay. And it's not because the games are looked at with rose-tinted glasses or are overpraised, but because those very same archaic controls and physics let players do tricks that are simply impossible to do in later installments, opening up a vast realm of possibilities. I love Metroid Fusion's QOL features, and I love Metroid Dread's frenetic pace and type movement, but Super Metroid just feels so much more expressive. Yes, I know Samus's floaty jump can be a pain to deal with at several points in Super Metroid, but that same weird jump combined with Samus's unusually fast running speed in this game makes stuff like this possible. I don't feel tethered to anything when I play Super Metroid. This is a good-ass meal, don't get me wrong, but this is a high-quality buffet with an endless amount of options. The key takeaway here is that games like Super Metroid and Mario 64 offer a great degree of versatility. Super Mario 64 gives you tons of ways to test the limits of what Mario can do and opportunities to pursue new solutions to familiar problems. It has a ton of underlying depth that, to be fair, is not super evident if you don't dig deep for it. All of this creates what is essentially a double-edged sword relating to Mario 64's core gameplay. You have all of these mechanics with hidden complexities that people who devote the time and energy into the game can learn to make use of, and their reward is the ability to play as the most expressive version of Mario in the whole franchise. On that same note, everything about the movement in this game is so involved that, while I wouldn't say it's flat out unapproachable, I'm sure most can complete a 70-star run, it can be very punishing. Super Mario 64 is not the most beginner-friendly game out there. Oh, well, I beat this game as a kid. Yeah, but how long did it take you to beat it as a kid? For many of us, did we really have anything better to do other than play video games when we were younger? This is not a game that's easy to get into now. That's why it has a tendency to deter those who didn't grow up with it. It's not only a game that's difficult to master, it can also be difficult to just get decent at and be able to play competently without looking like a baby who's learning to take their first steps. My main point here is that Super Mario 64 is one of the most immensely rewarding games to play, but it requires a bit of effort and patience from the player. For some, it may click faster than it will with others, but it also makes total sense why somebody would prefer these games. There's a reason why it's common to see new players like streamers, to give a contemporary example, trip and stumble in Mario 64 for the first time, looking like they've never played a video game before. They likely have, it's just that Mario 64, for as great as its movement system is also very rigorous. While I think it is important to acknowledge how games were perceived by audiences at the time of their release, that's a big reason why I go over the history and developments of the games I cover, I think it's just as, if not more important, to try to deduce why they may not be people's cup of tea now. So yes, all you N64 kids who played the game in 1996, Mario 64 was and is undeniably remarkable, and it was the best thing since sliced bread when it came out. But it's not perfect. It never was. And if somebody isn't able to get a grasp of the controls right away, it's not because they are uncultured or too young or any other justification people use to gatekeep shit nowadays. It's because there have been hundreds of 3D games since Mario 64's release that have conditioned folks to a very particular set of sensibilities about how a 3D game should function. And let's face it, Mario 64 is an outlier now. In the same vein, to those of you who understandably couldn't get into Mario 64 due to its unconventional elements, no, the game is not trash, it is not overrated. It's not that hard to understand why some people love it and appreciate its design so much, even if you personally don't. We don't have to lean towards one extreme or the other on every topic, guys. I'm sorry, it's just Mario 64 discourse does things to me, man. Oh god, okay. Anyways, I was supposed to talk about speedrunning too, right? Yeah, I'll just do that.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
There's no better place to look if you want to learn more about why Super Mario 64's movement is so celebrated than the passionate, talented, wonderful speedrunning community that the game has accrued. Mario 64 is one of the most famous speedrunning games for the sheer level of skill required to be a contender for the coveted world record in any of its primary categories, and for how enjoyable and comprehensible it is from a casual spectator's perspective. As we discussed, this is a very movement-centric game, and while the intricacies of its systems are challenging for many players to come to grips with, the basic fundamentals aren't. The speedrun, consequently, is also heavily movement-based, with few actual glitches to speak of. There are certainly exploits, strategies that likely weren't intentional on the developer's part, and yes, some glitches are used, especially in the low-star categories, but the grand majority of a Mario 64 speedrun involves the basic movement options that anybody who has played the game is familiar with. just executed in a flawless and optimal fashion. The limited reliance on overcomplicated glitches in Mario 64 speedruns and the inherent simplicity of what the runners are actually doing are some of the biggest contributing factors to the speedrunning scene's expansion over the years. The runs are not just fun to watch, amassing hundreds of thousands of viewers in people's streams and attendees at in-person events like Games Done Quick. They also have this way of making you think, you know what? Maybe I can do that too. Super Mario 64's 16-star category, for instance, is one of the most accessible speedruns out there. It's still not easy, far from it, and there is plenty of practice involved if you want to get even a semi-decent time, but the short length of the speedrun, along with the countless number of tutorials that the community has made for the category, and the sheer exhilaration you feel after getting a grasp of the route and learning how to do some of gaming's most famous tricks, the MIPS door clips and backwards long jumps that make beating the game with just 16 stars possible in the first place, yeah, it's easy to see why so many people have been drawn to 16-star. This was a common trend in 2020 especially. This was the year that I started speedrunning this game. I mean, I only compete with myself as I am nowhere near skilled enough to compete with top players, but even just the self-competition aspect itself is fulfilling. And hey, being able to say that you can beat Super Mario 64 in less than 20 minutes is pretty rad, regardless of how far it is in actuality from the world record. The important thing is that you have fun, and who knows, maybe you have the potential to be a top runner and don't even know it. You won't know what you're capable of until you give something a shot. This is why I really like events like Simply 16-star invitational tournaments and all those Mario 64 speedrunning highlight mashups. Stuff that shines the spotlight on lesser known beginner runners and their journeys, whether they've been playing the game for years or are just starting out, and paints an image of just how monumental the game has become. Just because this section of the video sort of gives me an excuse to talk about it more, the sudden surge that Mario 64 speedrunning experienced in 2020 only made the release of 3D All-Stars all the more disappointing, since the version of Mario 64 in that compilation is the 1997 Shindu version, where a couple of Mario's voice clips are freakishly high-pitched, grabbing trees feels weird, and most egregiously of all, that's disgusting. Relevant to the speedrun talk, however, is that this version of the game also patched out the ability to perform BLJs, so anything other than a 70 or 120-star run is off the table. I mean, it is technically possible to beat this version with less than 70 stars, much like how it's possible for me to get through a full day without an awkward interaction with somebody. So it's not possible. Yeah, what you're seeing on screen is a TAS-only trick, TAS standing for Tool Assisted Speedrun, achieved with the help of emulator tools and save states and the like to create a theoretical perfect run of a game without our pesky human limitations holding back the run's full potential. This was one of the first types of speedruns I ever watched for any game, a TAS run of Mario 64 way back in the day. I was in disbelief. How could somebody play the game this fast? Turns out they didn't really. The TAS side of speedrunning is just as important as the RTA human side though. The work and research that goes into creating a TAS often leads to new discoveries that could potentially evolve into legitimate strategies that may be viable for real runs someday. Single-star speedruns, which focus on optimizing how fast individual stars can be obtained, have also played their part in the evolution of full runs of the game. It took many years after the discovery of Tsukishima Cycle, an expert-level strat for Bowser in the Dark World, to be used regularly in RTA runs, and now many top runners can employ the trick without skipping a beat. Same goes for the moving red strategy in TikTok Clock that involves getting the red coins while the platforms are moving. There is a reason why I bring up speedrunning as much as I do on this channel. Speedruns have become some of the best sources for information and insight when I'm doing research for videos. Taking the time to understand a speedrun of a game opens my mind to its inner workings. It helps to inform me why certain design choices may have been made during development and how things actually operate under the hood. If I never explored the Super Mario 64 speedrunning scene, I never would have understood why 0-star runners don't just BLJ through the locked door in the lobby. Well, it's because the game doesn't load the rest of the castle unless Mario opens the big keyhole doors himself, which require the keys you obtain from the Bowser stages. I never would have known that the Blast Away the Wall star is always loaded in Whomp's Fortress and doesn't actually require the wall to be blasted away at all. One of the most famous tricks in Mario 64 speedrunning, Cannonless, exploits this exact oversight, since runners found out you can collect the star if you can make Mario grab onto a very specific part of the geometry here. If not for speedrunning, I don't think I ever would have gained the respect I now have for the game's movement and its infinite potential to be used for stuff like grabbing the red coins in Dire Docks without the poles, jumping to the island in Bob-omb Battlefield without the wing cap or cannon, and skipping the carpet in Rainbow Ride for the big house in the Sky Star. What is probably Mario 64's most infamous trick, carpetless refers to a strategy that allows you to skip the long, slow carpet journey in Rainbow Ride to get the star on the roof of the big house. For years, this was believed to be, once again, only possible in the realm of tool-assisted speedruns or with save states, which obviously aren't allowed in verified runs. Sure, a handful of people have been able to do this iteration of carpetless without save states, but at that point, when the trick is so difficult that only a lucky few in the world can say they've done it, it may as well be considered non-viable. But still, if a true, reliable carpetless setup was ever found, it would be the holy grail of SM64 speedrunning. The potential time save was attractive, almost as much as the dream of finally being able to put the joke to rest. And in 2023, it happened. An RTA viable setup for carpetless was found, and now 120-star runners are able to perform the once thought to be impossible trick consistently. Puncation was the first to get a world record with the strat, and at the time of writing this, the current 120-star world record by Ouija is 3 seconds shy from a 135 time. Not just because Ouija is an incredibly talented runner, but because of how much time carpetless saves. This discovery blew the lid wide open for times that were previously believed to be unattainable. Something about Mario 64 just awakens something in people, pushing them to attempt to defy the impossible. The aforementioned cannonless strat, while nowhere near on the same level as carpetless in terms of difficulty, was almost solely responsible for halting the progress of the 16-star category. The first iteration of the strategy required a frankly absurd amount of precision and, worst of all, luck. The situation was grim. However, the trick that some runners at the time believed would be the ultimate death of 16-star was conquered when a near 100% consistent setup was found. Cannonless, carpetless, these are just two examples of the Mario 64 community achieving incredible things. And what's all this junk about parallel universes and cosmic rays supposedly flipping a bit in somebody's SM64 cart during a run? Are we back in the Iceberg again? This is a game about an Italian plumber who jumps into paintings and beats up a giant turtle just to get some cake. Yes, that is an innuendo. Just where did this all come from? Passion. That's where. Pure, unembellished, raw passion. I didn't always love Super Mario 64, but now I hope you understand how it became one of my favorite works of art of all time. It is a truly transcendental video game. From the ocean of conspiracy theories to the remarkable communities of speedrunners and developers and fans keeping the game perpetually relevant online, to the endless replayability and fun I derive from the game itself through its movement, its structure and design, its coziness, its magical sense of wonder, I love everything about it. This game has had a constant presence in my life, almost as long as I've been alive. It reminds me of more whimsical times from my childhood, and as an adult, it makes me think about our own boundless potential as creators, as artists, as competitors, as humans, the potential we all hold that this magnificent game has unleashed. In every corner of the internet, you will find somebody who has a story or a memory about Super Mario 64. Like I said at the start, this game's legacy is unlike anything else. It's quite extraordinary. Some of the oldest videos on this very platform are Super Mario 64 focused. Let's plays, ROM hack showcases, funny moments compilations, and deep dives and retrospectives like the one you've spent the last hour and 47 minutes watching. And despite this oversaturation, I never tire of any of it. I've been wanting to make a video about Mario 64 ever since I started making content over 3 years ago, touching on its lasting legacy and the beauty of its gameplay that I had previously underestimated. I've been wanting to gush about this game's movement and the potential that it brings forth for so long. So, why did it take so long for this project to see the light of day? Well, a part of me felt that my thoughts weren't worthy of being shared, and that mindset held me back. At times, it still does. It's something that I'm working on to this day. However, I've been proven wrong time and time again, and I have you all to thank for that, for showing me just how far we can go if we just put our minds to it. Thanks for watching.
Thank you so much for playing my game.